Grandma, I'll be there in about 10 minutes.
I'm making your favorite fried chicken, Brad. Don't rush, just take your time. I thought I heard a little chuckle from Brad on the other end of the phone. But 10 minutes passed, and Brad never showed up. A month went by without a word from him. Why didn't Brad keep his promise that night without any explanation? Did something happen to him? One day, Brad's wife, Melissa, called me.
Brad passed away.
I was confused. Passed away? What do you mean, passed away? What do you mean? I don't quite understand.
It seems he fell asleep at the wheel. He crashed into a guardrail, and by the time he was taken to the hospital, he was already gone.
I was shaken by the suddenness of it all. Brad is gone? Fell asleep at the wheel? What? Are you joking? Did Brad get hurt? Which hospital is he in? I'll come right away.
No, he passed away a month ago. We finally finished his funeral and all the paperwork, and we're just starting to settle down. I'm so exhausted.
Melissa sighed dramatically. A month ago? The funeral's over? The call was abruptly cut off, leaving me feeling lost. My appetite faded more and more with each passing day. The grief buried deep inside me began to slowly take over, seeping into my body. One day, I caught a glimpse of my own face in a passing moment and was shocked. My face was full of wrinkles far beyond my age. I touched my eyes with my fingertips, feeling pitifully old. Every morning, as I prayed to his picture, Brad's happy smile would come to mind. It still didn't feel real, but 3 years had passed since then. 3 years without seeing Brad's face. Even though I never saw Brad's last moments, time confirmed the reality of it. One day, like usual, I was praying in front of his picture. I lit the incense, just like I always do. I closed my eyes and prayed for a long time. Just as the smoke was about to disappear, I heard a raspy voice behind me. We finally met again. In the silence, I felt something move behind me, and I turned around. What's going on? There stood Brad, the very person I had been told was gone. My name is Kate. I sit in my quiet living room, looking at old photos, reflecting on the past. One picture of my daughter's graduation hangs on the wall, representing a moment I'll never forget. The young girl in the photo, beaming with a bright smile, still warms my heart today. Back then, I was younger too, all dressed up. I thought to myself as I gazed at my reflection in the hand mirror on the desk. My gray hair flowed softly like gentle waves, and deep wrinkles lined my face. Tracing a wrinkle with my finger, I mumbled to myself, "You've been through so much." There was deep sorrow hidden in the long days spent with family. It was 20 years ago now. After the divorce, my daughter raised her son, Brad, on her own. I can't even begin to imagine the struggles of raising a child alone. I always wanted to help as much as I could, but my daughter gently refused my offers.
One day, when Brad grows up, I want to be able to hold my head high and say, I raised him well as a single mom.
That's what she told me. She struggled with money, but she never regretted her divorce.
I'm going to raise Brad myself.
My daughter looked me straight in the eyes and declared it with such strength. To me, my daughter was my pride. She was so confident, hardworking, and always stubborn. Once she made up her mind, she wouldn't bend. Even when I suggested she take a break and leave Brad with me for a while, she refused.
I'm his mom. A mom is always a mom.
She would say that with a smile. Such a strong daughter. Even to me, her mother, she shone so brightly. But my daughter, she passed away from overwork. The pain of losing her never faded with time, casting a shadow over my heart. I kept blaming myself for not seeing the cry for help behind her strong words and smiling face. I vowed that I would never let anyone close to me suffer the same way again. And the one closest to me at that time was my grandson, Brad. After my daughter's death, my husband and I took Brad in and raised him with all the love we had. Even though Brad lost his mother at a young age, he graduated from college and landed a great job at a prestigious company. Eventually, Brad moved out on his own. He had grown into such a fine young man. I felt a bit lonely, but my happiness far outweighed that. My husband passed away last year, leaving me to live alone. That loneliness weighed heavily on my heart. But whenever Brad came home for longer breaks, a warmth blossomed in my heart.
Next time I come home, there's someone I want you to meet.
It had been a while since we talked on the phone. I thought he was just calling to discuss when he'd visit next, but his words threw me for a loop. Someone he wanted me to meet. I understood right away that he meant a woman he was dating. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. Excitement built up as Sunday approached, the day we had planned for him to visit. That afternoon, as I waited for Brad, I prepared a special meal for him, something I hadn't done in a long time. I laid out a salad and side dishes that replicated the flavors my daughter loved, and my excitement grew little by little. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. I turned off the stove as the special soup started to boil and quickly rinsed the knife before heading to the entrance.
Grandma, I'm home.
Brad, still calling me Grandma like he did as a child, had grown into a tall and handsome young man. I couldn't help but smile, filled with joy.
I've got something to tell you.
Brad said before I could even greet him. He gently nudged the woman standing behind him forward to introduce her to me. My first impression was that she had porcelain-like skin. The woman with flawless, doll-like skin stood next to Brad, looking a bit nervous, but smiling brightly at me.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
The warmth in Melissa's cheerful greeting instantly drew me in. Even as a fellow woman, I was mesmerized by her beautiful skin. I could see why Brad had fallen for her. "Nice to meet you, Melissa," I replied, welcoming her as I led them to the living room. Brad and Melissa both exclaimed with delight when they saw the meal I had prepared. Their compliments on the food I had put much effort made me happy, and soon the conversation flowed naturally. I shared stories about my family and memories from Brad's childhood. Brad smiled sheepishly, and Melissa smiled gently at him as she listened.
Kate, please tell me more about Brad. I love him so much.
Her words touched my heart, and I could see how deeply she wanted to understand Brad, which filled me with joy. Suddenly, I realized something as I looked at Melissa's face. She reminded me of my late daughter in some way. Though he never said it out loud, Brad might have noticed too. Brad has always been a kind soul, Seeing him with you makes me feel at ease." I smiled, and she smiled and nodded. The warm atmosphere between us made me feel like a new family bond was forming. That night, after seeing Brad and Melissa off, I sat in front of the wall shelf in another room. I gazed at the pictures of my daughter and husband. "She seems like such a good girl," I whispered. "The Melissa that Brad chose would surely make him happy." I had a feeling about it. As time passed, they eventually got married. On the day of their wedding, the sky was brilliantly clear. Brad, the groom, wore a white tuxedo, his face showing a mix of nervousness and joy. Melissa, in her wedding dress, looked as beautiful as a movie star. Brad's eyes were filled with deep love for his bride, and I felt a sense of relief. Well, these two will surely be happy together. Melissa's friends were also stunning and lively, and their wedding was bustling and beautiful. Several years went by. At first, Brad visited frequently, but over time, his presence in my life slowly faded. I figured his married life must be keeping him busy, so I refrained from reaching out to him. Hoping Brad was happy, I focused on filling the small void of loneliness that had begun to sprout in my own life. One day, out of the blue, Brad showed up at my house. Surprised by his sudden visit, I peeked at his downcast face in the entryway. A sense of unease crept into my heart. Brad, standing before me, looked thin, pale, and as if he might collapse at any moment. I quickly invited him inside, my concern spilling over in my words. "What's wrong? You don't look well." He sighed deeply at my question. He nibbled at the tea and cookies I had prepared and stared up at the ceiling with sleepy eyes.
Actually, I've been having trouble at work with a guy named Jack, and it's really stressing me out.
His voice carried a tone of exhaustion, and I couldn't help but frown. No matter what advice I gave him about his workplace troubles, he'd probably just find it annoying. I wondered what kind of trouble Brad was referring to, but since he didn't bring it up, I decided not to pry. "And how are things with Melissa? If you keep looking this tired, she's bound to get bored."
Melissa's the type who enjoys going to spas and the gym by herself. We both value having our own time.
Spas and the gym. I guess that's how she keeps up her stunning looks. But even though Brad looks this worn out, I wonder if Melissa has noticed. If I started complaining about Melissa now, it was clear that it would only upset Brad. So I held back my true thoughts and refilled Brad's cup with tea. "Don't hesitate to come home anytime. This is your house." I spoke as gently as I could. Brad's expression softened slightly at my words, but the darkness lurking in his heart didn't fully fade, and he went back to staring blankly at the ceiling. The following weekend, I went on a trip with my friend. I noticed how foreign tourists have increased so much at the busy destination. Having never traveled abroad, I still found foreign visitors to be a rare sight, but here I almost felt like an outsider. With so many international travelers around, my eyes happened to land on one woman in particular. Wait, could it be? In the crowd, I thought I saw Melissa. She was arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize, a faint smile on her face as they walked close together. Her hairstyle and overall look were very similar. That porcelain-like, beautiful skin. There's no mistaking it. To ease the doubts growing in my heart, I decided to call Brad. When I called him, his voice still sounded as tired as ever. I casually brought up Melissa and asked, "How's Melissa doing?"
Melissa? She's back home for her grandfather's memorial service.
"A memorial service? You didn't go with her?"
Yeah, remember I told you about my coworker Jack? We're neck and neck in sales, so even on my days off, I have to work on reports.
Working on reports on his day off. I knew Melissa's family lived far away, so it made sense that Brad couldn't go with her if he had work. Sometimes young people all look the same to me, so maybe it was just my imagination. "Well then, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? I'm on a trip right now, but I'll be back home by the evening." Brad agreed to my invitation, happily accepting the offer for dinner. As I returned home and began preparing dinner, I started to calm down little by little. No matter what, I'd cook Brad's favorite meal and help him feel better. I marinated chicken in seasonings and prepared potato salad. I was about to put the chicken in the oven when Brad called me.
Grandma, I'll be there in about 10 minutes.
"I'm making your favorite fried chicken, so don't rush." I thought I heard a little chuckle from Brad over the phone. 10 minutes later, I checked the fried chicken in the oven. The sizzling sound filled the room. As I watched the fried chicken turn a golden brown, I couldn't help but smile. I hope this helps ease Brad's fatigue, even just a little. I stared at the fried chicken set on the table, waiting for Brad to come home. But no matter how long I waited, Brad never showed up, and hours passed by. Something didn't feel right. Could there have been an accident? I tried calling him, but Brad's phone didn't connect. He just answered the phone earlier. What could have happened? Worried, I decided to call Melissa. "Hi, Melissa. Brad was supposed to come over for dinner, but he hasn't shown up. Do you know anything?" Melissa curtly responded, "I don't know," and then fell silent for a while. I explained that Brad had been looking tired lately and that I invited him over to cheer him up with a home-cooked meal. Brad had never broken a promise without a word, so I was starting to panic, wondering if something had happened. A lot of time had passed since I'd last been able to contact him.
Okay, since I'm still back home for the memorial service, I'll return soon and contact the police. I'll hang up now.
The moment Melissa said she'd contact the police, a wave of fear swept over me. A cold sweat ran down my back. After hanging up the phone, I strongly wished for Brad's safety. I sat in front of the wall shelf and closed my eyes. The swirling anxiety and fear felt like they were going to crush me. Please, don't make me experience a pain greater than losing my daughter. Unable to sit still, I reached for the phone again, ready to call Melissa back, but in the end, I didn't. If something had happened to Brad, someone would contact me. But that day, neither Melissa nor Brad ever called me back. The cold dinner sat quietly on the table, growing hard. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I silently threw the fried chicken into the trash. As I washed the greasy oven tray in the kitchen, I imagined a different scenario.
Sorry, Grandma. I completely forgot about our dinner last night.
I could picture Brad bursting through the door, laughing as if nothing was wrong. I would smile back at him and make another batch of fried chicken for him to enjoy. And I want to say, welcome home. Honestly, You're such a handful. Days passed without any contact, and I found myself clutching my phone, unsure of what to do. Even though Brad is my grandson, he's an adult and married now, so it feels odd to keep calling him over and over. There was no word from Melissa either. They must have just forgotten about me and were probably enjoying their time together. At least, that's what I tried to convince myself. About a month later, Melissa finally called. I was full of questions, wanting to know everything. Why did Brad break his promise that night without any word? What happened after she contacted the police? Did something happen to Brad?
It's been a while, Kate.
It's been a while? Why didn't you contact me sooner? I've been worried sick.
I know. I understand. I'm calling today to give you an update.
The last time I spoke to Melissa, she had sounded so bright and cheerful, but now there was a coldness in her voice.
Brad has passed away.
There was a brief pause before she said it, and I was confused. Passed away? What does that even mean? What do you mean? I don't understand.
It looks like he fell asleep while driving. He crashed into a guardrail, and by the time they got him to the hospital, he was already.
The abruptness of the news left me shaken. Brad, gone. Fell asleep at the wheel? What? Are you joking? Did Brad get hurt? What hospital is he at? I'll go right away.
No, he passed away a month ago. We just finished his funeral and all the paperwork. It's been exhausting.
Melissa sighed dramatically. I couldn't process what she was saying. Still holding the phone to my ear, I started pacing around. A month ago. The funeral is over? As I struggled to find words, Melissa continued.
You must be shocked. I'm sorry. Since Brad grew up in a single-parent home and I heard his mom had passed away too, I completely forgot about you, his grandmother.
What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Brad? An accident? The funeral's over? What kind of twisted story is this? What's so fun about telling me this nonsense?
Well, I see. You're in denial. Anyway, I've done my duty by informing you. Brad is gone. That's all. Goodbye.
The call was abruptly cut off, leaving me devastated. I stared at the darkened screen of my phone, and the faint reflection of my face showed the fear I felt inside. I had lost my husband. I had lost my daughter. And now, had I lost my grandson too? Everyone I loved had left me behind. The reality of it all terrified me. With trembling hands, I dialed Melissa's number once more. All I wanted was for her to at least tell me where Brad's grave was. But no matter how many times I tried, I could never get through to her again. Day by day, my appetite faded. The grief that had settled deep in my heart began to slowly consume my body. One day, I caught a glimpse of my reflection and was shocked. My face, more wrinkled than my age should allow. I touched the lines around my eyes with my fingertips, feeling a deep sense of pity for myself. Every morning, when I prayed in front of Brad's picture, his happy, smiling face would come to mind. Since I never found out where Brad was buried, I had no choice but to place his picture next to my husband's and pray for him there. It didn't feel real, but 3 years passed. 3 years without seeing Brad's face. Even though I hadn't witnessed Brad's final moments, time had confirmed the truth. Since he's been gone, my world has lost its color, and the scenery around me always appears in shades of gray. One day, as usual, I knelt in front of the photos to pray. As always, I lit the incense. Closing my eyes, I prayed for a long time. Just as the smoke was about to fade, I heard a raspy voice behind me say, "We finally meet again." In the silence, I felt something move behind me, and I turned around. What I saw was beyond belief. Brad was standing there. His face showed a mix of unease and a sorrow so deep it seemed like he might burst into tears at any moment. Was this a dream? No, even if it was, I didn't care. I was so overwhelmed with joy and surprise that tears started to pour from my eyes.
Grandma.
Brad. The moment Brad called me Grandma, I rushed toward him, clinging to his arm. For a while, I couldn't speak. I just kept touching him, making sure he was really there. I stroked his arm, held his hand, touched his chest, and gently ran my fingers through his hair. Brad stood there quietly, allowing me to examine him, his face expressionless.
I'm sorry I couldn't contact you.
After confirming he was real, I asked why he hadn't been able to reach out. Looking closely, I noticed his face was slightly distorted. "What happened to your face?" When I asked, Brad responded sadly.
I have a little facial paralysis from my accident. I hit my head hard in the crash. I had temporary amnesia.
Amnesia? But, hearing Brad's words, I remembered what Melissa had told me. She said Brad had died in the accident, and that his funeral had already been held. What had that been about? I briefly relayed what Melissa had said to me, and Brad crossed his arms, nodding as if something clicked.
Melissa? I see. So that's what it was. It all makes sense now.
Brad's expression darkened.
No, I'm sure Melissa set me up.
I stood there, speechless, as Brad began explaining calmly. 3 years ago, while driving to my house, Brad had an accident. He said he wasn't feeling well, so he stopped at a nearby convenience store to take a break, but suddenly his vision went dark. He was in a coma, and it took a month for him to regain consciousness.
I remember it vaguely now. My mind was foggy, and I couldn't think straight. But I think Melissa looked disgusted when she saw me lying in the hospital bed.
His memory was unclear, and he spent days in confusion, unsure of what was real.
I had a coworker named Tom. Tom was worried about me and came to the hospital every day to check on me.
Even though the doctors had said it was unlikely Brad's memory would return, Tom never stopped visiting, encouraging him. One day, Brad started to feel as if the fog had lifted, and his memories slowly came back.
When I finally started thinking clearly, Tom told me he thought Melissa might have been behind the accident.
That's what happened to you.
Grandma, I need to carry out a plan. I need your help.
Brad looked at me with serious eyes. There was a fire of revenge in his words. Hearing him, I hesitated for a moment, but then my heart swelled with a sense of purpose. "What do you need me to do?" At that moment, after 3 long years of being alone and hopeless, the wheels of fate began turning for me. There were a few preparations we needed to make before putting the plan into action, which took several days. And then the day came to execute the plan. I made my way to the apartment where Melissa and Brad used to live. When I entered the room number at the entrance, Melissa's suspicious voice came through.
What's going on?
It's been a while, Melissa. We never really talked about Brad's grave or the details of the accident, right? It's been 3 years, but can we get over everything?
Why now, after all this time, Brad's death is still a shock for me. Could you please just leave me alone?
I'm getting old, you know. The trip here has worn me out. Can I come in and rest for a bit? I could hear Melissa's sigh in annoyance on the other side of the intercom. Reluctantly, she let me in, clearly displeased, as she sat down with a frustrated look on her face. The apartment was reasonably clean. Bright sunlight streamed through the large windows. The plants near the window gently swayed in the breeze from the air conditioner.
So, what do you want to know?
Her skin, which I hadn't seen in 3 years, was as flawless and porcelain-like as the first time we met. The way she looked up at me from her chair, combined with her perfectly crafted skin, now gave off an impression that felt almost unapproachable. It was midday on a weekend, and yet she was fully made up, despite being home alone. The first thing I want to ask is why you never told me about the accident.
Are you a doctor? Would Brad's injuries have magically healed, and he'd still be living happily here if I'd told you?
That's quite a leap. I'm just saying, as a relative, you could have informed me.
You're his grandmother, not his mother, right? I was the closest family member. I decided not to tell you, and that was the correct decision, wasn't it?
It's no use talking to her. I can already see her attitude, ready to argue against everything. What happened to make her like this? Or was this the real Melissa all along?
I was just as shocked. I came back from a trip when I heard about Brad's accident. I think I had planned to stay for 3 nights, but I rushed back.
A trip? It's been 3 years, and my memory's a bit fuzzy, but I thought Melissa had said she went back home for a relative's memorial service. When I pointed that out, she pressed her lips together with her finger and said, "I must have forgotten." I suddenly remembered seeing Melissa with a strange man at that tourist spot. Could it have been them? Actually, I ordered some food. I think we've had some misunderstandings, so why don't we sit down and talk openly?
I don't need any takeout. Just leave once you're done. I'm not exactly free, you know?
Don't worry, it's fine. Just then, the doorbell rang. I'll get it. It's probably the delivery. I quickly headed to the door. Melissa, clearly irritated, pursed her lips, probably thinking I was just some bothersome old lady. But when I opened the door, it wasn't the delivery person. Standing there were Brad and his coworker Tom. They greeted me briefly and swiftly entered the apartment. Melissa, sensing someone else had come in, stood up in a panic, but before she could react, Brad was already heading toward the bedroom.
Hey, what are you doing? Wait, Brad?
She shouted reflexively at the 2 men who entered uninvited, but upon realizing it was Brad, her face shifted to one of confusion. Brad silently scanned the room. Tom, also wordless, opened doors to the bathroom and other rooms. A strange thud came from the closet in the back of the bedroom.
What are you doing? Stop! Get out!
Melissa raised her voice, grabbing Brad's arm to pull him back. But Brad, without saying a word, barged into the room and threw open the closet door. There, cowering with his hands folded in front of him, eyes wide, was a man trying to hide.
It's been a while, Jack.
The man, whom Brad called Jack, stepped out of the closet, wiping the sweat from his forehead awkwardly. He must have hidden the moment I arrived, silently enduring the heat in the cramped space. Melissa, still clutching Brad's arm, shouted.
This is trespassing. I'm calling the police.
The lease is still in my name.
Brad replied coldly, and Melissa's face turned pale. It was clear that Jack and Melissa had been having an affair, and Brad calmly laid out the truth that Melissa had plotted to ruin him.
It seems like you had a pretty good time while I was in the hospital after the accident. I don't recall ever divorcing you, Melissa.
Melissa and Jack exchanged glances, then burst out laughing. They were trying to play dumb.
I didn't know your memory had come back. If I had, I would have rushed to the hospital to pick you up.
Melissa said, feigning innocence. Brad's coworker, Tom, who had always admired Brad, pulled out his phone and played an audio recording.
Listen to this.
It was a conversation between Melissa and Jack in the office break room. The recording had been carefully edited, clearly revealing their plot to bring Brad down. The recorded voices sounded so cheerful, as if they were reminiscing about a vacation, but the conversation was cruel. They talked about slipping small amounts of poison into Brad's dinner to gradually make him sick, and tampering with the car brakes. To them, Brad had already become a distant memory, and they spoke with the casual tone of someone sharing a mischievous story from the past.
I overheard this at the office recently and rushed to record it. How do you explain this?
Tom's voice echoed through the room, leaving Melissa and Jack speechless. Brad continued, touching on how Melissa had been poisoning his food regularly.
I've had so many days of feeling sick since we got married. Turns out it was your cooking.
Brad had thought his weight loss was due to stress from work, but it was actually Melissa's doing. He had suffered daily bouts of intense stomach pain, but now, after 3 years of recovery, he looked much healthier than before. Melissa, losing her composure, finally snapped.
Yes, it wasn't just poison. We were planning to get rid of you, make it look like an accident. The brake tampering was part of our plan.
Her words sent a wave of anger through me. How dare you? What do you plan to do to make this right?
Make it right? What are you talking about? Brad's still alive. Isn't that enough for you?
Enough? Absolutely not. As I shouted, Melissa gave a cold laugh.
No matter what you say, it doesn't concern me. Brad's alive.
She refused to even look at me, acting as if none of this mattered. At that moment, the door opened again, and someone entered through the front entrance. An older man, dressed in a crisp gray suit.
Michael.
As soon as Jack saw the older man, he raised his voice in surprise. The man, with a stern expression, scanned the room before fixing his gaze on Jack once again.
Jack, what's going on here? Explain yourself.
His authoritative voice made Jack panic, and he hurried to apologize to his president, Michael. Melissa looked confused, mumbling, "What's going on?" as Jack kept his head down.
Michael, I'm sorry, but my girlfriend means everything to me.
I had already heard from Brad that this man, Jack, actually had a girlfriend. And not just anyone. She was the daughter of the company president. He managed to keep his engagement to the president's daughter a secret, all while having an affair with Melissa. He's quite a skillful man, if you could call it that. Jack, still bowing deeply, shouted again.
My girlfriend is the most important person in my life.
Melissa clung to Jack's arm, pleading.
What are you talking about? I thought I was your number one.
Jack pushed her away, continuing to apologize, but Michael responded coldly.
There is no number one. The engagement is off, and you're fired.
Michael, still furious, shouted in a harsh tone.
I've heard enough from you. I know you and that woman conspired to bring Brad down. What were you thinking?
Jack turned pale, his body trembling.
That's not true.
He mumbled faintly, clearly trying to figure out what to say next.
This is really a misunderstanding.
A misunderstanding? You think this is something you can explain away?
Michael already knew everything, from how Jack had plotted with Melissa to make the accident look like a freak occurrence, to how he had suggested poisoning Brad's food. Because Jack had always seen Brad as a rival, he harbored resentment toward him, which led him to act so recklessly. Tom had already informed Michael, and Michael came here today to confirm everything for himself.
Your actions aren't just a betrayal of the company. You failed as a human being. Of course, the engagement is over.
Michael, please. Wait. This was all her doing.
Huh? What are you talking about?
Jack desperately tried to shift all the blame onto Melissa. Melissa glared at him, her face openly displaying her disgust. But Michael wasn't buying it.
I came here hoping this was all a misunderstanding. But it seems this is your true nature, Jack. I'm disappointed. Resign from the company immediately.
As Michael turned to leave the room, Jack jumped to his feet, chasing after him. Jack shouts in a panic.
Michael, please give me another chance.
Don't tarnish the company's name any further, you fool.
Jack chases after Michael, apologizing again in front of him, shouting through tears.
Michael, please. Just one more chance.
Ignoring his pleas, Michael walked out. Jack collapsed to the floor, left behind in despair. Melissa, realizing that she, too, had been betrayed by someone she loved, seemed visibly shaken and collapsed onto the floor. With tears welling up in her eyes, Melissa walked over to Jack.
It'll be okay, right? You'll find another job. You're talented, Jack. You'll land at an even better company, I'm sure.
The two of them sat there, gazing at each other as if they were the only ones in the world. To someone unaware of the situation, it might have looked like a touching scene. But these two, they seemed to have forgotten something important. It was Tom, Brad's loyal coworker, who reminded them.
The poisoning and the brake tampering. I've already reported everything to the police. You'd better be ready to face the consequences. This time, there's no escaping it.
Tom, smiling, held up the voice recorder. He had recorded everything, even their conversation today. Melissa's mouth hung open, her eyes widening in disbelief. She clawed at her cheek, digging her nails into her skin. The perfect porcelain complexion she had always maintained now cracked, with a large fissure splitting her face in two. I had thought Melissa was stunning when I first met her. But now, standing on the edge of despair, with nowhere to turn, she looked utterly ruined. Soon, both she and Jack were taken away by the police and received prison sentences for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Brad seemed deeply affected after Melissa's sentencing. It pained me to think of the emotional scars left by her betrayal. I felt an overwhelming urge to support my beloved grandson, and my days were now filled with thoughts of how I could help him move forward. Sometimes Brad would drop by unexpectedly. He would sit and talk, often laughing bitterly, as he reflected on why he had ever fallen for Melissa. Much like my first impression, Brad had been captivated by her flawless, porcelain-like skin. Her beauty had drawn the eyes of everyone around, and Brad had felt a sense of pride in having her as his girlfriend. Even after everything she had done, and despite the betrayal, Brad still found himself captivated by her beauty. It's a little funny and sad. Beauty is something that changes with time. Just look at my skin. It's full of wrinkles, right? But you know, these wrinkles are proof of my long life. Every happy and sad moment is etched here.
Maybe I was only looking at Melissa's appearance.
A woman's looks are important, yes. But what's even more important is the kindness in her heart. That's the kind of beauty that never fades, no matter how old you get. As I said these words, I felt a little embarrassed. Not too long ago, I used to sigh at my reflection in the mirror. I'd pull at my wrinkled skin, wondering if there was anything I could do. But after seeing Melissa's face that day, as beautiful as she once was, my perspective changed. No matter how flawless your skin is, how well you apply makeup, or how much skincare you do, you can't hide what's inside. Under all that foundation, Melissa's true face was far from beautiful. Then I thought, it's much better to have a face full of wrinkles, especially laugh lines. That's how I started to feel. One day, I picked up my phone and decided to call Brad. I'd heard he had been promoted to manager, and I wanted to congratulate him from the bottom of my heart. When the call connected, I heard Brad's voice.
Grandma, it's been a while. How have you been?
I've been good, Brad. I've been thinking about you. I heard you got promoted to manager. Congratulations.
Thanks. It was tough getting here, but it feels like I'm finally starting something new.
It's because you worked so hard. I'm always cheering you on. And if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know.
Thank you so much. Actually, I've been thinking about moving back home. I feel like I need to clear my mind and settle down at your place.
Hearing those words made my heart warm. Still holding the phone to my ear, I glanced at the family photos. My husband and daughter are smiling at me, as if they're saying, "It's good, isn't it?" That sounds like a great idea. Coming back home will be the perfect way to refresh yourself.
I'm really looking forward to staying at your place, Grandma.
And I'm looking forward to having you. When you come, I'll cook a delicious meal for you. I decided I'd make that fried chicken, Brad's favorite, that I never got to serve him last time. Even in the busyness of my days, I started preparing for Brad's return, always wishing for his happiness. A few days later, everything was ready, and I eagerly awaited his arrival. The room was filled with the savory smell of cooking, and soon the doorbell rang. I stood up immediately and opened the door. There was Brad, standing with a carefree smile. The happiness of finally saying the words I hadn't been able to say that day filled me with joy, and I couldn't help but smile. Welcome home. You must be hungry, right? Let's have dinner.